The year is 2011. A high-altitude reconnaissance drone departs from a classified airbase somewhere in Afghanistan. It crosses into Iranian airspace on a mission so sensitive that almost nobody in Washington will confirm it exists. And then it disappears. Not destroyed, not shot down in the traditional sense. It simply goes dark. Hours later, Iranian state television broadcasts footage that shocks every intelligence analyst, every aerospace engineer, and every military official who sees it. There on the ground, in one piece, barely scratched, sits one of the most classified aircraft the United States government had ever built, the RQ-170 Sentinel. And what happens next, what engineers and intelligence professionals discovered when they got their hands on that aircraft, is one of the most consequential and disturbing chapters in modern military history. If you are fascinated by the technology that shapes the world we live in, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Let us start at the beginning, because to understand why the capture of this drone was so significant, you need to understand what the RQ-170 Sentinel actually was. Not what the government admitted it was, what it actually was. The United States Air Force officially acknowledged the existence of the RQ-170 Sentinel in December 2009. That acknowledgement was not voluntary. It came only after photographs of the aircraft taken at Kandahar Airfield in Afghanistan leaked online and spread rapidly through aviation and defense communities. Aviation Week ran the photos. Analysts immediately recognized that this was not a standard surveillance drone. The shape was wrong. The design philosophy behind it was fundamentally different from anything the Air Force had publicly discussed. And suddenly the government had no choice but to confirm that yes, this aircraft existed. But the confirmation was minimal, bare minimum. The Air Force released a short statement describing the Sentinel as a low-observable unmanned aircraft system. They said it was operated by the 30th Reconnaissance Squadron. They said it provided airfield intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And then they stopped talking. No performance specifications, no operational details, no photographs beyond what had already leaked. Just enough words to confirm the aircraft existed, without telling anyone anything meaningful about what it could actually do. The aviation community, however, was not satisfied with that, and the photographs that had already been published were enough to tell a very specific story to anyone who knew how to read them. Look at the shape of the RQ-170, and the first thing you notice is that it has no tail. None. No vertical stabilizer, no horizontal stabilizer, in the traditional sense. It is a pure flying wing design, with a blended body, smooth curves running continuously from the leading edge to the trailing edge, with almost no angular interruptions. The wingspan is estimated at between 65 and 90 feet. The fuselage is a rounded, almost teardrop-shaped body, integrated seamlessly into the wing. There are no weapons bays that anyone could publicly confirm. There are sensor apertures, smooth flush-mounted openings that suggest sophisticated electro-optical and infrared imaging systems, possibly signals intelligence packages. The landing gear is retractable. The engine inlet is on the upper surface of the fuselage, which is a deliberate stealth design choice, because placing the inlet on top shields the radar-reflective engine compressor blades from ground-based radar systems looking upward. Every single one of those design decisions was made with one purpose in mind: to be invisible. Not invisible to the naked eye, invisible to radar, invisible to the detection systems that militaries around the world use to track aircraft entering their airspace. The RQ-170 was designed to cross borders without anyone knowing it was there. It was designed to loiter over targets without triggering alerts. It was designed to collect intelligence in places where no aircraft should have been able to go undetected. And for years, it worked. The Sentinel had been operating in Afghanistan since at least 2007, possibly earlier. It operated in other locations that the United States government has never officially confirmed. It flew over North Korea. It flew over Iran. It likely operated in other theaters that remain classified to this day. Every mission was covert. Every mission was deniable. The aircraft had no markings that would definitively identify it as American if it were ever found. It was a ghost in the sky. And then on December 4, 2011, the ghost landed in Iran. Iranian officials went on state television and announced that their military had brought down an American stealth spy drone. They displayed the aircraft on a platform draped with banners, surrounded by Revolutionary Guard personnel. Iranian generals spoke about their victory, and the aircraft sitting there on that platform looked, to the horror of American officials watching the broadcast, almost completely intact. There were a few details that stood out immediately to anyone who had studied aircraft. The landing gear was extended, suggesting a controlled or semi-controlled landing, rather than a crash. The airframe showed no major structural damage, no broken wings, no fire damage, no impact deformations consistent with being shot down by a missile or destroyed by electronic warfare. The aircraft appeared to have come down in one piece, more or less exactly as if it had simply landed. The question that consumed every intelligence agency and aerospace engineer who saw that footage was immediate and urgent. How? The United States government's public response was careful and revealing in what it did not say. President Obama confirmed that the United States had lost an unmanned aerial vehicle in Iranian territory. He asked Iran to return the aircraft. Iranian officials refused, and beyond that, the public statements from Washington were remarkably sparse for an event of this magnitude. Behind closed doors, however, the reaction was anything but calm. Sources who spoke to journalists and researchers in the years that followed described a genuine crisis atmosphere in the intelligence community. Because what the Iranians had was not just a piece of hardware. What they had was a rolling encyclopedia of classified American aerospace technology. Every material, every system, every design choice baked into that aircraft represented years of research, billions of dollars of development, and the current state of the art in American stealth engineering. And it was now sitting in a facility in Iran, where teams of engineers and intelligence professionals from multiple countries were going to spend years pulling it apart. Let us talk about exactly what those engineers found, because this is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary. The first thing anyone examining the RQ-170 would focus on is the stealth coating. Stealth aircraft are not stealthy simply because of their shape, although shape is critically important. They are also stealthy because of the materials applied to their surfaces. Radar-absorbent material, commonly abbreviated as RAM, is a composite coating that absorbs radar energy rather than reflecting it back to the source. Different radar-absorbent materials work across different frequency bands. The composition of those materials, the precise formulation of the compounds, the thickness of application, the layering techniques used, all of that is classified information of the highest order because it directly determines how detectable an aircraft is to specific radar systems. When Iranian engineers and their partners began analyzing the surface coating of the RQ-170, they were not just looking at paint. They were looking at a technical blueprint of American stealth material science as it existed in the late 2000s and early 2010s. They could measure the composition, they could analyze the layering, they could understand exactly which frequency bands the Americans were designing their stealth systems to defeat. And with that knowledge, they could begin working on radar systems designed to penetrate that exact stealth solution. This is why the capture was so much more serious than a simple intelligence loss. An intelligence loss means your adversary knows what you know. A technology capture means your adversary knows how you think. It reveals your engineering assumptions. It reveals your threat assessments. It reveals what radar frequencies you were most worried about defeating, which in turn tells you exactly which radar frequencies to develop. The second major area of examination was the avionics suite. Modern reconnaissance drones are not simply cameras attached to an aircraft. They are flying sensor platforms of extraordinary sophistication. The RQ-170 was believed to carry multiple sensors, potentially including high-resolution electro-optical cameras capable of producing imagery with enough detail to read license plates from altitudes above 50,000 feet. Infrared sensors capable of detecting heat signatures through clouds and in complete darkness. Signals intelligence collection systems capable of intercepting and analyzing electronic emissions from the ground below, and possibly synthetic aperture radar systems capable of mapping terrain and identifying targets through weather conditions that would make optical imaging impossible. The processors running those systems, the data links transmitting the collected intelligence back to operators, the encryption systems protecting those transmissions, the software architectures managing sensor fusion across multiple collection modalities simultaneously, all of that was potentially inside that airframe. Even if Iranian engineers could not fully reverse engineer the most sophisticated components, the very fact of examining them would tell them what was possible, what the Americans had built, what they should be trying to build themselves or with partners. And the partners question is where the story takes on its most serious geopolitical dimensions. Multiple defense analysts and intelligence officials, both named and anonymous, made clear in the years following the capture that Iran did not examine this aircraft alone. China and Russia, both countries with sophisticated aerospace industries and active stealth development programs of their own, were given access to the aircraft. How much access, under what conditions, and what exactly they took away from that examination has never been fully disclosed publicly. But the implications are significant and have shaped American military planning in the years since. China at the time of the capture was in the process of developing its own stealth aircraft programs. The J-20, China's first operational fifth-generation stealth fighter, made its first flight in January 2011, just 11 months before the Sentinel was captured. The J-31, a smaller carrier-based stealth fighter, was moving through development. Chinese engineers examining the material science and sensor architecture of the most advanced American unmanned stealth aircraft would have had access to information worth incalculable sums in terms of shortcutting their own development timelines. Russia's stealth programs similarly were accelerating in this period. The Sukhoi Pak-4, known in the West as the T-50, and later redesignated the Su-57, was in its early flight test phase. Russian aerospace engineers examining American stealth solutions would have been able to compare notes against their own approaches and potentially identify areas where they could improve their designs or where American systems had vulnerabilities they could exploit. This is the compounding nature of a technology capture. It does not just tell your adversary what you have. It accelerates their programs. It shortcuts years of research and development. It hands them solutions they might have spent decades and billions trying to discover on their own. Now let us talk about how the aircraft came down, because that question has never been fully and definitively answered publicly. And the different possible explanations each carry their own extraordinary implications. The most widely cited theory, and the one that Iranian officials themselves promoted with great enthusiasm, is that Iranian forces used electronic warfare to hijack the aircraft. Specifically, the claim was that Iranian engineers spoofed the GPS signal that the drone's navigation system was relying on. By broadcasting a false GPS signal of gradually increasing strength, they effectively tricked the aircraft's navigation system into believing it was somewhere other than where it actually was. They then guided it to a location of their choosing and induced a landing. If this theory is correct, the implications are staggering. It would mean that even a classified, highly sophisticated American military drone was relying on unencrypted or insufficiently protected GPS signals for navigation. GPS spoofing as an attack vector had been discussed in academic and security research contexts for years before 2011, but the idea that it could be used to actually take control of and land a military reconnaissance aircraft of this classification level was, if true, a revelation about a fundamental vulnerability in the system design. A 2011 article in the Christian Science Monitor quoted a source described as an Iranian engineer with knowledge of the operation who claimed that Iranian forces had first jammed the aircraft's communications link with its American operators, causing the drone to switch to autopilot mode. In autopilot mode, the standard return-to-base protocol would rely on GPS navigation. The Iranians then fed the aircraft false GPS coordinates that matched the layout of the drone's home base, but pointed to a location inside Iran. The aircraft, following its programming, descended toward what its systems believed was Kandahar airfield, and instead touched down in the Iranian desert. The fact that the aircraft landed wheels down and mostly intact does support some version of a controlled descent scenario. A drone that had simply lost contact and entered a fail-safe crash dive would not look like the aircraft shown in Iranian state television footage. Something guided it down. Whether that something was Iranian electronic warfare, a malfunction in the aircraft's own systems, or some combination of factors remains officially unconfirmed. American officials, when pressed, have been carefully non-committal. Some suggested the aircraft may have suffered a malfunction. Some pointed to the GPS spoofing theory without fully endorsing it. None have provided a definitive public accounting of exactly what happened. That silence itself is informative. If the answer were simply an embarrassing mechanical failure, there would be less reason to maintain ambiguity about the cause. The continued official vagueness suggests the answer involves capabilities and vulnerabilities that the United States government has no interest in publicly confirming. What is known is that after the capture, the United States military moved with significant urgency to review GPS navigation dependencies across its unmanned systems fleet. Changes to navigation architecture for military drones, the development of GPS-independent and GPS-redundant navigation solutions, and the hardening of data links against jamming and spoofing all accelerated in the years following 2011. The RQ-170 incident, whatever its precise cause, served as a forcing function for improvements that the system designers should arguably have implemented from the beginning. Now let us pull back and look at the broader picture of what this aircraft represented and why its capture was so significant beyond the immediate intelligence losses. The RQ-170 Sentinel was not just a surveillance tool, it was a demonstration of a doctrine, a philosophy of warfare that the United States had been developing and refining since the early days of stealth technology in the 1970s and 1980s. That doctrine held that technology could create decisive asymmetric advantages. That aircraft, invisible to radar, could project power and collect intelligence in places that would otherwise be denied. That speed of information collection and the ability to act on that intelligence faster than an adversary could respond would define military superiority in the modern era. The B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, the F-117 Nighthawk, the F-22 Raptor, and eventually the F-35 Lightning II all embodied this doctrine applied to manned aircraft. The RQ-170 and its more capable classified relatives embodied the same doctrine applied to unmanned systems that could take risks no military would be willing to take with human pilots. A drone shot down over hostile territory is a loss. A pilot shot down over hostile territory is a potential hostage, a diplomatic crisis, a human tragedy. Removing the human from the cockpit fundamentally changes the risk calculus of the mission. But the RQ-170 capture revealed a tension at the heart of that doctrine. Removing the human also means removing the human's judgment. A pilot who realizes something has gone catastrophically wrong can improvise. A pilot can make the decision to destroy the aircraft before landing in enemy territory. A pilot can override automated systems that are being fed false information. An unmanned system following its programming cannot do any of those things, not unless those capabilities are explicitly designed in from the beginning. The question of whether the RQ-170 carried a self-destruct capability has been a matter of significant public speculation. Classified reconnaissance aircraft have historically been equipped with destruct systems. The U-2 flown by Francis Gary Powers in 1960 carried an explosive device intended to destroy the aircraft if it were about to be captured, though the system was never activated before Powers was captured by Soviet forces. The assumption would be that a classified drone of the RQ-170's sensitivity would carry similar provisions. Yet the aircraft sat on Iranian television looking very much like something that had not been destroyed. Possible explanations vary. Perhaps the destruct system failed. Perhaps operators who still had partial communication with the aircraft made the decision not to activate it for reasons that remain classified, possibly to deny Iran confirmation that it had successfully downed a military aircraft. Perhaps the aircraft landed in circumstances that were ambiguous to its operators until it was too late to trigger a destruct sequence. None of these explanations are fully satisfying, and none have been officially confirmed. What is confirmed is that President Obama explicitly asked Iran to return the aircraft, and Iran explicitly refused. Iranian engineers had already begun their examination before the full implications of the capture had been processed in Washington. The window for preventing the technology transfer had closed before anyone could act on it. Now let us talk about what engineers examining this aircraft from an adversarial perspective would have done methodically and systematically. Because understanding the process helps understand why the damage extended well beyond any single technology or system. The first stage of any serious technical intelligence examination of captured hardware is documentation. Before you touch anything, before you disassemble anything, you photograph and measure everything, every surface, every dimension, every angle. You build a complete geometric model of the aircraft. You measure the precise shapes and contours of every surface, because in stealth design, those shapes are not arbitrary. They are the product of computational electromagnetic modeling that calculates exactly how radar waves will interact with every surface of the airframe. By measuring those shapes with precision, you can reverse engineer the radar cross-section calculations. You can understand what radar cross-section the designers were trying to achieve and against what specific radar frequencies. The second stage is material sampling. Small samples of surface material, structural material, and coating layers are removed and subjected to spectroscopic and chemical analysis. This tells you exactly what the radar-absorbent material is made of, its composition, its density, its electromagnetic properties across different frequency ranges. With this information, you can manufacture the same or similar material. You can also design radar systems specifically tuned to penetrate that material. The third stage is system identification. You identify every component, every sensor aperture, every antenna, every connector, every cooling vent, every mechanical interface. You catalog what is there and try to understand what each element does and how it connects to everything else. Even components you cannot fully analyze tell you something about the overall system architecture. The fourth stage is component analysis. Individual avionics components, processors, sensors, and data link hardware are removed and subjected to detailed examination. Even if the software driving those components is encrypted or erased, the hardware itself reveals a great deal. The types of processors used indicate processing power and architecture. The antenna designs reveal frequency ranges and radiation patterns. The sensor optics reveal resolution and spectral sensitivity. Each piece is a data point that contributes to an overall picture of American technical capability. The fifth stage, and perhaps the most valuable for a sophisticated adversary, is synthesis. You take everything you have learned from documentation, material sampling, system identification, and component analysis, and you integrate it into an understanding of American engineering philosophy and capability. What problems were the designers trying to solve? What solutions did they choose? What trade-offs did they accept? What vulnerabilities might those trade-offs have created? The synthesis stage is where tactical intelligence becomes strategic advantage. For China and Russia, both of whom had sophisticated enough aerospace industries to conduct this kind of analysis at a high level, the RQ-170 examination would have been extraordinarily productive. Not just for any single technology, but for the comprehensive picture it painted of where American stealth unmanned aviation was as of the late 2000s. And here is a detail that deepens the significance further. The RQ-170 was not the most classified or most capable drone in the American inventory. It was an important and sophisticated system, but there were and are more advanced classified platforms operating above it in the hierarchy of American unmanned aviation. By examining the RQ-170, sophisticated adversaries could extrapolate. If this is what America was fielding openly enough that photographs leaked from Kandahar airfield, what must the truly classified systems look like? The captured drone became a reference point for estimating the upper limits of American capability. Let us also talk about the specific intelligence mission context of the RQ-170, because understanding what this aircraft was actually doing matters enormously. The Sentinel's presence in Afghanistan was not primarily about monitoring the Taliban or tracking insurgent activity. The aircraft was positioned at Kandahar because Kandahar was geographically convenient for operations into two specific neighboring countries. One was Pakistan, where the aircraft was used in the intelligence preparation for the May 2011 raid on Osama bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad. American officials have confirmed that the RQ-170 was used to surveil the compound in the weeks before the raid, providing the intelligence about compound layout, guard patterns, and the physical environment that made the planning of that raid possible. The world knows how that raid ended. The RQ-170's role in enabling it is one of the aircraft's most historically significant confirmed operational missions. The other country the RQ-170 was monitoring from Kandahar was Iran. Specifically, the aircraft was being used to surveil Iranian nuclear facilities. The intelligence community had been tracking Iran's nuclear program intensively for years. The ability to overfly Iran's most sensitive facilities with an aircraft that Iranian radar could not reliably detect gave American analysts a window into activities that could not be observed through any other means. The timing of the December 2011 capture, occurring just months after the bin Laden raid, had confirmed the RQ-170's operational value, suggests the aircraft was in the middle of exactly this kind of mission when it came down. Which means that beyond the technology captured in the airframe itself, there is also the question of what mission data was aboard the aircraft. What imagery had it collected? What signals intelligence had it recorded? What did the stored data on its systems reveal about what targets it had been observing, for how long, and with what sensors? This dimension of the intelligence loss has received less public attention than the hardware capture, but it may have been equally significant. Understanding that American intelligence was focused on specific facilities, with specific sensors, collecting specific types of data, tells Iranian counterintelligence exactly how to better conceal the activities the Americans most wanted to see. In the aftermath of the capture, Iran moved aggressively to develop and publicize its own drone program. Iranian military officials claimed the RQ-170 had been reverse-engineered and that an Iranian copy would be produced. In 2014, Iranian state media released footage of what they claimed was a flight test of an Iranian drone modeled on the RQ-170. Western analysts debated how sophisticated the Iranian reverse engineering effort actually was. Photographs of the Iranian version suggested that while the external shape roughly resembled the Sentinel, the internal systems and aerodynamic fidelity were likely significantly inferior to the American original. Building a shape that looks like a stealth aircraft is not the same as building one that actually performs stealthily. The radar-absorbent materials, the precise surface contours, the internal architecture required to make stealth work are enormously sophisticated and cannot simply be copied from examining an exterior form. But that analysis may have been overly optimistic, or at least incomplete, because the value of the examination was never primarily about Iran building its own RQ-170. Iran is a significant military power, but not a leading aerospace technology nation. The value was in what Iran shared. With China, with Russia, with other partners who do have the industrial and engineering capacity to productively apply what they learned. The RQ-170 was not just a capture, it was a gift that Iran could give to its strategic partners in exchange for the political, economic, and military support those partners provided. The aircraft's value multiplied as it passed through multiple hands. This brings us to the strategic legacy of the 2011 capture, because the effects on American military planning and technology development have been substantial and ongoing. The most immediate effect was on the unmanned systems program itself. The vulnerabilities exposed by the RQ-170 incident, whether GPS spoofing, communication link jamming, or something else entirely, drove a comprehensive review and redesign effort across the military's drone fleet. Navigation systems were hardened, alternative positioning methods were developed and integrated, data link architectures were redesigned to be more resistant to jamming and spoofing, fail-safe protocols were reviewed, destruct system reliability was assessed. The RQ-170 incident forced the unmanned aviation community to confront vulnerabilities that had been accepted or overlooked during a decade of operating in permissive environments, like Afghanistan, where adversaries did not have the electronic warfare sophistication to threaten these aircraft. The second major effect was on stealth technology development. The knowledge that China and Russia had examined American stealth material science accelerated efforts to develop next-generation radar-absorbent materials and coatings that would provide stealth performance against frequency bands that adversaries, now aware of the RQ-170's specific solutions, would be tuning their systems to penetrate. This is the fundamental dynamic of military technology competition. Every advance reveals information that drives adversary countermeasures, which in turn drives the next advance. The RQ-170 capture dramatically compressed one cycle of that competition. The third effect, perhaps the most consequential in the long term, was on the thinking about classified program security and operational procedures. The RQ-170 had been operating from a base in Afghanistan where, as those early leaked photographs proved, it could be seen and photographed by civilians and journalists. The assumption that aircraft operating from a NATO-held airfield were secure from exposure was clearly incorrect. After 2011, the management of classified unmanned programs, how they are based, how they are operated, what happens to them if they are about to be captured, received renewed and urgent attention. Now let us talk about where the story goes after 2011, because the RQ-170 was not the last classified drone to be captured or lost, and understanding the pattern helps understand both the risks of this kind of technology and the ways in which the United States has adapted. In 2019, Iran shot down a U.S. Navy RQ-4A Global Hawk, a large, high-altitude surveillance drone, over or near the Strait of Hormuz. The Global Hawk is a much less classified system than the RQ-170, and unlike the Sentinel, it was destroyed by a surface-to-air missile rather than captured intact. But the incident highlighted the persistent reality that operating unmanned aircraft in contested airspace carries real risks that do not disappear simply because no human life is directly at stake. The loss of a Global Hawk is a significant asset loss even without a technology compromise. More recently, in March 2023, an MQ-9 Reaper drone was intercepted over the Black Sea by Russian Su-27 fighters in what American officials described as reckless and unprofessional behavior by the Russian aircraft. The Reaper went into the Black Sea. Video released by the Pentagon showed the Russian jet dumping fuel on the drone and eventually striking its propeller before the drone became uncontrollable and was deliberately ditched by American operators. That incident was handled better from a technology security standpoint because the drone went into deep water rather than landing intact in adversary territory. but it illustrated once again the constant tension between the intelligence value of operating drones in contested areas and the risks of losing those assets. The captured RQ-170 sits against this backdrop as the seminal case, the one where the worst outcome, intact capture with full examination by adversaries, actually occurred, and it remains the benchmark against which subsequent incidents and procedures are measured. There is one more dimension of the RQ-170 story that deserves serious attention, and that is the human dimension, not the engineering, not the geopolitics, the actual people involved. The operators who flew the RQ-170 from its ground control station, possibly located at a facility in the United States, given the satellite-linked nature of these operations, watched their aircraft disappear from their control. They had trained for contingencies. They understood the protocols. But understanding protocols does not prepare you for the specific psychological experience of watching a classified national asset, representing decades of work by thousands of people, slip beyond your ability to do anything about it. The seconds or minutes during which the aircraft was being guided down, if that is what happened, whether operators knew what was occurring or whether the last telemetry was simply normal followed by nothing, that experience of loss and helplessness is something that does not appear in official reports or public analyses. The analysts who had relied on the RQ-170 for intelligence collection over Iran now had to operate with a collection gap. The specific access that aircraft had provided, the specific coverage of specific facilities at specific times, was gone. Collection plans had to be revised. Intelligence gaps had to be filled by other means, and the awareness that Iranian counterintelligence now knew what had been watched, for how long, and with what sensors, required a complete reassessment of what they might have done to conceal activities they knew were being monitored. The engineers who had designed the aircraft, who had made the design choices about navigation systems and communication links and fail-safe protocols, faced their own reckoning. Not a public one, not one that appears in news articles, but an internal professional confrontation with decisions that had seemed reasonable at the time and that had now produced an outcome nobody had wanted. And the intelligence officers and military commanders who had authorized the missions, who had made the operational decisions that put the aircraft in Iranian airspace, carried their own weight. These decisions are made by real people with incomplete information, under time pressure, with the conviction that the intelligence value justifies the risk, until the day it does not, and then the accounting happens behind closed doors, in classified reviews and official inquiries that the public will never read. This is the reality of intelligence and military operations that does not make it into the headlines. The human cost of these missions is not always measured in casualties. Sometimes it is measured in careers, in professional reputations, in the understanding that a decision you made, that you believed was correct, contributed to a consequence that will shape the security landscape for decades. Let us now look at the broader lessons that the RQ-170 capture offers, because they extend well beyond the specific technologies involved. The first lesson is about the assumption of invulnerability. The RQ-170 was designed to be undetectable by radar, and in large measure it was. Its stealth performance was real and significant, but stealth against radar is not the same as invulnerability. An aircraft that cannot be detected by radar can still be detected by other means, by human intelligence, by tracking its electronic emissions, by observing its operating patterns and predicting where it will be, by exploiting vulnerabilities in its non-stealth systems like GPS navigation or communication links. The assumption that because one dimension of vulnerability was addressed, the system was secure, was the kind of comfortable assumption that sophisticated adversaries are always looking to exploit. The second lesson is about the compounding nature of technology loss. Losing the specific radar-absorbent material formula is bad, but the more serious loss is the information about what problems the designers were trying to solve and how they approached solving them. That meta-level information about engineering philosophy and decision-making is far harder to protect than any specific technical parameter, and it is far more valuable to a sophisticated adversary trying to understand and counter your capabilities. The third lesson is about the relationship between capability and risk management. The RQ-170 was extraordinarily capable. Its stealth performance, its sensor suite, its ability to operate in denied airspace and collect intelligence that could not be obtained any other way, all of that capability was real and valuable. But capability creates temptation. The more capable a system is, the more aggressively it will be tasked. The more missions it flies in high-risk environments, the greater the cumulative probability that eventually something will go wrong. The most sophisticated aircraft in the world cannot make every mission safe. Capability and risk are not opposites. Sometimes they are companions. The fourth lesson is one that applies to the entire domain of unmanned systems, and one that is more relevant today than ever. When you remove the human from the aircraft, you gain certain things and you lose certain things. You gain the ability to accept risks you could not accept with a human crew. You gain endurance, because machines do not tire the way humans do. You gain deniability, because an unmanned aircraft captured or destroyed provides no human face, no prisoner, no diplomatic crisis in the way that Francis Gary Powers in 1960 did. But you lose adaptability. You lose the judgment of a trained professional who can read a situation and deviate from programming when deviation is necessary. You lose the human's ability to look out the window, recognize that something has gone fundamentally wrong, and make the decision to destroy the aircraft rather than let it fall intact into enemy hands. Every unmanned system is a balance of those gains and losses. The RQ-170 incident revealed exactly where one end of that balance could lead. Today, more than a decade after the capture, the RQ-170 Sentinel remains in Iran. Iranian officials have occasionally referenced it in statements about their military capabilities. The aircraft has presumably been examined as thoroughly as Iranian, Chinese, and Russian engineers could manage. Whatever information could be extracted from it has been extracted. The physical presence of the aircraft in Iran is now more symbolic than operationally significant from an intelligence standpoint. But the effects of its capture continue to ripple through military technology development, intelligence collection, and strategic planning on all sides. The radar systems being developed to counter American stealth aircraft, the electronic warfare capabilities being refined to threaten navigation and communication systems, the unmanned aviation programs being built in China and Russia and Iran that drew at least some of their inspiration or direction from that examination, all of those trace a line back to December 4, 2011, and a drone that disappeared over the Iranian desert. American unmanned aviation has continued to advance dramatically in the years since. The Air Force has acknowledged programs like the RQ-180, believed to be a more capable and more sophisticated successor to the RQ-170, operating at higher altitudes with greater range and improved stealth characteristics. Programs even more classified than the RQ-180 almost certainly exist. The Navy has developed and fielded the MQ-25 Stingray for carrier-based refueling operations. The Air Force is developing the Collaborative Combat Aircraft, a class of loyal wingman drones designed to fly alongside manned fighters. The entire character of air warfare is being transformed by unmanned systems in ways that the architects of the RQ-170 program could not have fully anticipated. But all of those programs carry the memory of 2011 in their designs. The improved navigation redundancy, the hardened data links, the more robust fail-safe protocols, the more carefully managed operational security. Every engineer who has worked on a classified unmanned program since 2011 has done so with the awareness that their work might one day be on a platform in an adversary's hands. That awareness shapes choices in ways both small and profound. There is something important to understand about what the examination of the RQ-170 tells us, not just about that specific aircraft, but about the nature of technological competition between great powers. Technology does not provide permanent advantage. It provides temporary advantage measured in years or perhaps a decade or two. Adversaries study, copy, improve, and surpass. The history of military technology is a continuous cycle of innovation and counter-innovation, advantage and counter-advantage, capability and vulnerability. The B-2 stealth bomber that seemed like an impenetrable technological wall when it was revealed in the late 1980s is now a platform that sophisticated adversaries have spent 3 decades learning to detect and target. The F-117 that flew undetected over Baghdad in 1991 was shot down by an upgraded Serbian air defense system in 1999 using modified older radar technology. Technology does not stay decisive forever. What the RQ-170 represents, what its capture accelerated, is one turn of that cycle. The stealth solution it embodied, revolutionary when it was developed, is now a reference point that adversaries have examined and are working to defeat. The next generation of stealth aircraft, the B-21 Raider, which has now been publicly revealed, and the classified systems that operate above even that level, represent America's attempt to stay ahead of the cycle, to remain in the position of fielding capabilities that adversaries have not yet learned to counter. Whether that effort succeeds, whether the cycle can be sustained, Whether the investment in technology continues to produce margins of military superiority that justify the cost. These are questions that defense planners and policymakers wrestle with every day. The RQ-170 and its capture are permanent fixtures in that ongoing conversation, not just as a historical event, but as a case study in what the competition costs when the advantage slips, even for a single mission on a single day, over a single stretch of desert. The men and women who designed the RQ-170, who flew it, who built the intelligence infrastructure around it, who tasked it with some of the most sensitive missions of the decade, all of them understood the stakes. They understood what they were trying to achieve and what the cost of failure would be. They operated at the very edge of what technology and human skill could accomplish. And on December 4th, 2011, the edge gave way. That is not the end of the story. It is one chapter in a competition that continues every day in the airspace above countries that most of us will never visit, between systems that most of us will never see, operated by people whose work will never be fully acknowledged. The classified world of stealth unmanned aviation is vast, active, and consequential. The RQ-170 gave us a rare and unwanted window into that world. A window forced open not by journalists or leakers or declassification, but by an aircraft that came down in the wrong place at the wrong time and stayed in one piece long enough for the whole world to see it. Every sensor system, every coding, every navigation protocol, every fail-safe design decision in every classified drone flying today exists in part because of what engineers learned from examining what went wrong with the one that did not make it home. That is how technology evolves. That is how the competition works. And that is why the story of the RQ-170 is not just a story about a drone. It is a story about the unending, high-stakes, largely invisible contest to shape the future of warfare. A contest where the stakes are measured not in headlines but in the decisions made in classified briefing rooms and engineering labs, by people carrying the weight of what they know and what they lost and what they are determined never to lose again. If you found this story as gripping as the technology itself deserves, hit the like button below, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on your notifications because the stories we cover next go even deeper into the world that shapes the world you live in.